I never imagined that the courtroom, a place I once worshipped like a temple, would be where my life was shattered into pieces I couldn't even recognize. That morning, I woke up with certainty in my chest. I was going to win the university's most prestigious mock trial, the final step before securing a real internship with Blackwell and Crane, the top legal firm in the country. I'd studied harder than anyone, skipped birthdays, abandoned sleep, and poured every piece of my soul into this. I was top of my class, respected by professors, feared by rivals, but all of that meant nothing once Willow walked into that courtroom. My girlfriend of 3 years, the person I had shared every note, every strategy, every fear with, walked in wearing the prosecutor's robe, and right behind her was Ethan, the charming, silver-tongued transfer student with a reputation for seduction and manipulation. The moment our eyes met, Willow didn't smile, didn't blink, didn't even flinch. She walked past me like I was just another case to win. At first, I thought it was just for the sake of the competition, just performance. We'd agreed to play our roles ruthlessly, and we promised no hard feelings. But when the trial began and she started spewing details only someone close to me would know, private texts, confidential arguments I'd made in practice, obscure references I'd never shared with anyone else, I realized she had betrayed me. Not just in the courtroom, but in real life. My entire defense strategy was crumbling because Willow was feeding my arguments to Ethan, who sat smugly behind her as her co-counsel. The case? A mock murder trial where I was defending an innocent client. But suddenly, it felt like I was the one being accused. Objections were thrown like knives, and every one that landed came with a smirk from Ethan and a blank stare from Willow. The judge, a real circuit court judge invited by the school, began frowning at me, doubting my credibility because somehow they knew my cross-examinations were eerily similar to a case she had presided over 2 years ago. That was impossible, unless someone had accessed my old files, which I kept backed up on a private drive. I remembered giving Willow my login once, months ago, when she said her laptop crashed during finals. I hadn't thought twice about it. Now that same trust was being twisted into a weapon against me. The spectators whispered, my professors took notes in silence, and the tension thickened as I stammered to keep up. My objections were overruled. My witnesses fumbled. Evidence was mysteriously found inadmissible. Files I had prepared went missing from the shared database, replaced by outdated versions. The only explanation? Sabotage. And I was watching it unfold in real time, unable to stop it. I caught Ethan looking at Willow the way I used to, and it made me sick. His hand brushed against hers under the table, and though it was subtle, it confirmed everything. They weren't just teammates. They were lovers, and they were willing to ruin me to win. The final blow came during the closing argument. Willow stood up, her voice calm, composed, and devastating. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she began, the defense would have you believe in fairy tales, in hypothetical possibilities that stretch logic and law. But I ask you to look not at his words, but at his desperation. When facts failed him, he turned to manipulation. I watched her hands gesture with grace and control, the same hands that once cupped my face and promised forever. The truth is simple. Justice is not about passion. It's about precision, and the prosecution has provided both. When she sat down, the entire room applauded, not because of justice, but because of performance. And I sat there frozen, realizing I had just been executed in public, not by my enemies, but by the woman I loved and the man who stole her. The verdict came within 20 minutes. Guilty. Not the client, me. Not officially, but symbolically. The judge didn't even wait to praise the prosecution's brilliance. And a professor from Blackwell and Crane stood up and announced that Willow and Ethan were selected for the internship. I didn't move. I couldn't. My legs were numb, and my throat burned with the bile of betrayal. As the room cleared, I remained seated at the defense table, staring at the stack of ruined notes in front of me like they were tombstones. Willow passed by, whispered, "I'm sorry," without a single drop of remorse in her eyes. Ethan didn't even pretend. He laughed, clapped me on the shoulder, and said, "Maybe law just isn't your thing, George." That night, I packed my things in silence. I was told the ethics committee would be reviewing my conduct given the suspicious overlaps with prior court cases and the missing evidence. I knew what was coming. Expulsion, humiliation, blacklisting. But I wasn't thinking about any of that. I was thinking about revenge, about how justice wasn't about law. It was about truth. And now that I had been stripped of everything, my future, my reputation, my love, I had nothing left to lose. And that made me more dangerous than they could ever imagine. They thought they'd buried me, but they didn't know I was a seed. And when I bloom, it won't be with flowers, it will be with fire. Let the trial begin. The real one. The days that followed my disgrace felt like drowning with my eyes open, suffocating in a world that kept moving without noticing I had stopped breathing. Professors who once praised me now ignored me. Students whispered like I was some criminal. And the dean summoned me into her office only to hand me a letter suspending me, pending further investigation into ethical misconduct, as if I were a fraud, a cheater, a disgrace to the institution I had once lived for. But even as I walked out of that office with my future stripped from me like flesh from bone, I refused to crumble. Not yet. Not before I unearthed the truth and made them feel what I felt in that courtroom, powerless and betrayed. And so I vanished. Not literally, but in the way that matters. I stopped showing up to lectures, skipped campus events, ignored texts from friends I now realized were only ever loyal to my status, not to me. And in the solitude of my rented room 2 blocks from campus, I started building a case. Not for court, but for war. I wasn't interested in their sympathy or clearing my name through apologies and bureaucracy. I wanted them to bleed reputationally, emotionally, professionally. I wanted them exposed. So I dug deep, starting with Willow. She wasn't just my girlfriend. She had been my confidant, my partner, someone I trusted with access to my hard drives, my passwords, even my academic accounts. And I remembered 3 months ago when I'd let her borrow my laptop to finish her brief after hers supposedly crashed. I never checked what she accessed back then, too naive to imagine she would weaponize my kindness. But now I did. And what I found confirmed everything. I had a backup copy of my access logs, and there it was. A file transfer initiated from my drive to hers, timestamped 3:42 a.m., the day after the mock trial teams were announced. She had downloaded my entire archive of past case studies, strategies, and legal analyses, including one particular breakdown of a 2021 fraud trial presided over by the very same judge who oversaw our mock case. And that breakdown matched, almost word for word, the cross-examination strategy I used during the trial, the same strategy they claimed made me suspicious. They'd set me up. Ethan and Willow had taken my notes, fed the strategy to the prosecution, and let me walk into a trap. And the deeper I dug, the darker it got. I broke into an old group chat we all used for study sessions. And there I found screenshots, private messages, Willow bragging to Ethan about how she had everything George is planning. He's predictable. Ethan replying, "Let him be smart, we'll be smarter." They'd planned this like a heist, down to the last manipulation. And worst of all, they'd used me as a shield to protect themselves from scrutiny. They made sure I looked suspicious so that no one would ever question their win. But I wasn't going to the school board with this. Not yet. No, I needed something bigger. Something they couldn't spin or smother. And that's when I met Clara. She was an intern at a legal podcast called The Judgment Seat, known for exposing real scandals in elite universities and firms. We weren't friends, but I remembered her from our ethics seminar, the one Willow never took seriously. Clara always asked the hard questions, always had that look in her eye like she could see through the masks people wore. I found her outside the law building, surrounded by notes and coffee, and when I told her I had a story, she didn't hesitate. She followed me back to my place, and for the next 3 hours, I told her everything. From the relationship, to the betrayal, to the file logs and the group chat screenshots. She didn't interrupt once, just took notes, asked smart questions, and nodded. And when I finished, she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "This isn't just a scandal. It's a case study in corruption. If what you're saying is true, you don't just deserve justice. You deserve headlines." That night, we agreed to start collecting evidence, not just for a podcast episode, but for a full-on expose. We gathered witness statements from former friends, found proof that Ethan had bribed another student to fake testimony during the mock trial, and even discovered that Willow had been using an AI text tool to rewrite my legal briefs and submit them as her own in earlier classes. Plagiarism, sabotage, conspiracy. They had buried themselves in so many lies they no longer knew where the surface was. But still, I wasn't satisfied. I needed more. I needed to make it personal. So I did something desperate. I reactivated an old email Willow didn't know I still had, one we used for joint study notes. Then I sent her a message pretending to be a third-year senior from another law school, someone who had admired her trial performance and wanted her opinion on a sensitive legal question, a subtle test, and she fell for it. Over the next few days, she opened up, bragging about how she dominated the courtroom and played the system like a piano. I baited her into admitting that she had accessed old files from a friend and improved them to make the prosecution flawless. It was vague enough that it didn't scream guilt, but it was enough to show intent. Clara was stunned. We now had a trail of breadcrumbs that could burn them both, but I didn't stop there. I went to Ethan next, not directly, but through his ego. I knew he was giving a guest talk at a high school law club nearby, so I posed as a student journalist and asked for an interview about his rise to legal fame after the legendary mock trial. And like the narcissist he was, he couldn't resist. I wore a fake badge, carried a mic, and asked him loaded questions about preparation, teamwork, and strategy. And when he slipped, saying, "You just have to know your opponent's playbook before they walk in," I smiled, because it wasn't just arrogance, it was confession. Clara and I compiled everything into a digital file labeled "The Trial Before the Trial." Screenshots, audio files, system logs, messages, witness statements, enough to drown them both. And still, I waited, because timing was everything. And the right time, I realized. was the upcoming seminar where Willow and Ethan would be giving a presentation on legal ethics in modern trials. Irony, it seemed, had a wicked sense of humor. The entire faculty would be there, students too, and even the Blackwell and Crane representative who had handpicked them. I planned my return like a resurrection. I wasn't just walking into that room as a disgraced student. I was walking in as a storm, with proof, with poise, with purpose. And as I rehearsed the speech I would give, the bomb I would drop in front of everyone who had laughed behind my back, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not rage, not sorrow, but clarity. And it tasted like justice. They thought I was done, but the only thing they buried was the version of me who trusted too easily. The new George? He was the case they should have never opened. The morning of the seminar arrived not like salvation, but like Judgment Day, hiding behind a peaceful sunrise, the kind that tricks you into believing the world is gentle, only to strike when your back is turned. I hadn't slept, not because I was afraid, but because I was ready, finally ready to burn down the lies that had wrapped themselves around me like a noose. My suit was tailored, dark as midnight, and pressed to perfection, the kind of armor that didn't just make a man look sharp, but lethal. Clara met me on the steps of the auditorium, disguised in a cardigan and thick-framed glasses like an ordinary intern, her laptop tucked under her arm with our payload secured inside. The room was packed. Students, professors, firm representatives, and even a few journalists who were promised a lecture on modern legal ethics and the integrity of mock trials by the university's golden duo. Ethan and Willow stood at the front like two smug statues carved from dishonesty, smiling at the crowd, soaking in the spotlight that belonged to me. My chest tightened, not from nerves, but from a coiled storm of rage I'd been suppressing for weeks. I slid into the back row and waited like a snake in tall grass, watching as Willow took the mic and began her performance, her voice dripping with faux modesty. "Today," she said, smiling with those lips that once whispered love and now spoke poison, "we want to talk about the soul of justice." I almost laughed. Ethan stood beside her, nodding sagely, occasionally glancing toward the audience with that infuriating smirk. They didn't see me. Not yet. But that was the point. When you want a lie to collapse, you don't knock it down. You pull out its foundation. I waited until Willow began describing the mock trial that made them famous. "It was a difficult case," she said, "but preparation, discipline, and mutual trust led us to victory." That's when I stood, slow, deliberate, unshaking. The silence was immediate, as if the room's lungs had been yanked from its chest. All eyes turned to me. Willow's face drained of color as if she had seen a ghost. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. The dean sat up straight, confused and alarmed. "I believe," I said, my voice echoing through the auditorium like a gavel slam, "that this audience deserves to hear what really happened during that trial." Clara was already moving, plugging in the flash drive, changing the projector feed from their presentation to ours. And there it was, the access log. Proof of file theft. Timestamps showing Willow had copied my defense files at 3:42 a.m. the week before the trial. Gasps filled the room. A few students even covered their mouths. "This," I said, stepping forward, "is evidence of academic sabotage." I turned to the crowd. The strategy they used to win was not their own. It was mine. Stolen, manipulated, and then used against me to accuse me of cheating. And they didn't stop there. Slide after slide flashed, screenshots of private messages between Ethan and Willow mocking my trust, bragging about how easy it was to fool the judge, even coaching each other on how to make me look suspicious. And then the audio. Ethan's voice, cocky and unfiltered. "You just have to know your opponent's playbook before they walk in. George won't know what hit him." Dead silence followed. Not even a cough. Willow stammered something, but I silenced her with a glance. "Don't speak," I said, sharp as glass. "Not until you explain to the dean why you submitted reworded versions of my work in ethics class last semester. Or maybe you'd like to explain how you accessed my secure folders while pretending your laptop was broken. You remember that night, Willow? You looked me in the eyes and told me you loved me while stabbing me in the back. I saw tears start to well in her eyes, but I felt nothing." Ethan tried to step forward, puffing his chest, but Clara clicked to the next slide. A screenshot of Ethan bribing another student to fake a testimony about hearing me admit I was cheating. It was over. Professors began murmuring. The dean looked like she was going to faint. And the Blackwell and Crane rep stood up slowly, looking at Willow and Ethan like they were insects he'd accidentally stepped on. "You are both suspended immediately," the dean finally said, her voice cracking, "pending a full investigation. If any of this is fabricated, we will handle it. But if it's not, and it seems quite real, then neither of you will ever practice law in this country." But I wasn't done. "You won't just lose your futures," I said coldly, eyes on Willow, who looked like a dying animal caught in headlights. "You'll lose the thing you value most, your illusion of superiority, the admiration, the myth you built around yourselves. You'll be remembered not as prodigies, but as parasites." The room was chaos now. Security arrived, not to drag me out, but to escort Willow and Ethan from the hall while reporters ran after them. I stood in the wreckage of their legacy like a man reborn. Professors came to me, apologizing, praising my courage. Classmates who had whispered about me now looked ashamed. But I didn't need their validation. I had justice, not just in evidence, but in humiliation, in truth exposed in the exact same arena where they had once slaughtered me. Clara put a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "You did it, George. They're finished." I nodded, but my mind was already somewhere else, because even though I had burned them, the ashes still stung. I had lost weeks of my life, my reputation, my peace, and no amount of justice could return what betrayal had stolen. But I had one more move to make, and it wasn't revenge, it was reinvention. That night, Clara uploaded the full expose as an episode titled Mock Justice, the Case That Mocked the Law. It went viral within hours. The dean herself made a public statement the next morning, apologizing for the university's failure. Blackwell and Crane withdrew their internship offers and publicly condemned Willow and Ethan. Lawsuits began swirling, academic panels formed, and I disappeared again, this time not to hide, but to heal. I packed a bag and took a train upstate to a quiet town where no one knew my name, and for the first time in months, I breathed. I watched the trees sway outside a cabin window, read books with no relation to the law, and rediscovered who I was outside of war. But one morning, Clara called. Her voice excited. "I've been offered a grant to expand the podcast. They want an entire investigative series on academic corruption. And they want you, George, not just as a guest, but as a co-host." I smiled, not because I needed the attention, but because it meant I could do what Willow and Ethan never could. Use my voice to protect the truth, not exploit it. The irony was poetic. They tried to silence me with lies, but in doing so, they created a monster made of truth. And I was just getting started. The days that followed felt like stolen time. Silence wrapped around my cabin like a second skin, and for the first time in months, I wasn't watching my back. No betrayal lurking in the corners, no whisper campaigns to endure. Just wind in the trees, the scent of pine, and the haunting echo of what I'd done. Exposing Willow and Ethan had felt like victory, but beneath the surface, something restless stirred. A part of me that wondered what I'd become in the process. I had torn apart two people, humiliated them in front of an entire institution, and I didn't feel guilt, not even for a second. That's what scared me. Justice had always been my compass, but now vengeance had carved itself into the steel. Clara and I spoke every day. Our podcast exploded overnight, trending globally, as mock justice became a war cry for every student who'd been silenced, every underdog who'd been buried. We weren't just telling stories anymore, we were igniting movements. Clara was offered sponsorships, interviews, even an invitation to speak at a TEDx event. And me? I was being begged to return to the university. The dean called personally, groveling, offering me not just readmission, but a public apology and an honorary award for exposing the biggest scandal the school had ever seen. I ignored her the first time. The second. But on the third, I said yes, not because I wanted redemption from them, but because I needed to finish what I started. I returned to campus like a man rising from the grave, every hallway echoing with the ghosts of the past. Students stared, professors nodded respectfully, and even the ones who once doubted me couldn't meet my eyes. The trial records had been corrected, the charges erased, but the scars weren't gone, and neither were Willow and Ethan. Expelled. Yes, disgraced, definitely, but not destroyed. And I knew people like them didn't vanish quietly. They plotted, they festered, they waited. Still, I focused on the work. Clara and I began interviewing other students who had been victims of academic theft, political targeting, or relationship-based sabotage. We uncovered stories more horrifying than mine. A blind student whose work was stolen by his research partner. A girl who had her thesis corrupted by her jealous ex-boyfriend days before graduation. We became something bigger than a podcast. We became a tribunal. And that was when the threats started. Anonymous emails telling me to shut it down. Notes slipped under Clara's door with red-inked warnings like, "Stop digging or you'll end up buried too." She was shaken. I wasn't. I'd already been to hell, and I didn't intend to leave without dragging every liar into the light. One night, I came back to my apartment and found the door cracked open. My things were trashed, books ripped, laptop smashed, and a photo of me and Willow from our first year pinned to the wall with a knife through my face. Beneath it, a single word scrawled, "Traitor." I didn't call the police. I just sat down on the floor, staring at that photo, wondering who I was now. The George in that picture was smiling, naive, in love. The George now? Hardened, precise, and capable of things he once thought beneath him. The university launched an internal investigation into the break-in, but no one was caught. I didn't need them to tell me who it was. I knew Ethan's style, performative, personal, theatrical, but I also knew his weakness, ego. If he was escalating, it meant he felt cornered, and that meant he had something to lose. I dug deeper. Clara and I used old contacts from the tech lab to recover Ethan's deleted files from the cloud, and what we found changed everything. He and Willow hadn't just sabotaged me, they'd been working with a private law firm to leak high-performing student work and sell research drafts to competing universities. academic espionage. We were sitting on a bombshell big enough to shake the entire education sector. We compiled a full report, encrypted it, and sent it to 3 major academic watchdog groups, including the Higher Education Integrity Commission. We knew it would take weeks before anything happened, but we weren't prepared for what came next. Clara disappeared. One moment she was texting me about her grocery run, and the next her phone was off, her apartment door left ajar, her laptop missing. Panic clawed through me. I tore through her apartment, heart pounding, hands shaking. No blood, no sign of a struggle, just her cat meowing by the window and the smell of cold coffee. I knew this wasn't a coincidence. I called every number I had, even the police, but there was no trace. That night, I sat in my car, staring at the city skyline, and realized I had crossed a line. I had drawn blood, and now the wolves were biting back. The next morning, I received an email from a burner address. Stop publishing. She's safe, for now. Attached was a photo of Clara, bound, blindfolded, but alive. Rage consumed me, a firestorm that obliterated any trace of hesitation. I called the dean, demanded full access to every file connected to Willow and Ethan's disciplinary hearings, and threatened to go public with everything if she didn't cooperate. She folded. Within hours, I had video footage, signed documents, timestamps that proved Willow had met with the same firm that had just had Clara taken. I took it all to a journalist I trusted, a former student now working with The Guardian. He agreed to publish the story on one condition. He needed a smoking gun, something irrefutable, something from Willow herself. And so I baited the trap. I messaged her a single line. I know what you did. Meet me. She responded within minutes. Where? I chose the mock courtroom, the place it had all started, a fitting arena for final confessions. When she arrived, she looked thinner, worn down, her eyes no longer gleaming with confidence. George, she whispered, like my name was a wound. Please, you don't know the full story. Then tell me, I said, voice like ice. Tell me why Clara's gone, why your firm is trafficking student work, why you thought destroying my life was worth 30 pieces of silver. She broke. Maybe because she was tired, maybe because she still felt something for me, or maybe because part of her wanted to be caught. She confessed to everything. How Ethan had seduced her with ambition, how the firm had promised jobs and money, how she had regretted it all but felt trapped. I recorded every word. When she finished, I stood silently and walked out. No shouting, no threats, just a man who had finally caught the devil and didn't need to scream. I sent the audio to the journalist. Within 48 hours, the story broke. Headlines screamed, elite law students behind academic espionage ring. University ethics scandal deepens with kidnapping allegations. Police raided the firm, rescued Clara from a remote hideout, and arrested Ethan. Willow turned herself in. The university was thrown into chaos, but I stood still in the eye of the storm. Because this time, I hadn't just survived, I had won. Clara was shaken, thinner, but alive. She hugged me with a force that nearly cracked my ribs. They didn't break me, she whispered, and you didn't break either. We went back to the podcast studio, battle-scarred but stronger, and recorded our most powerful episode yet. I ended it with these words. Justice isn't about being right. It's about standing when everything tries to knock you down. It's about holding the line, even when it costs you everything. The world listened. And this time, they heard me. The storm had passed, or at least that's what everyone said. Reporters stopped hounding my doorstep. The university quietly issued public apologies and revised their academic protocols. Clara began sleeping through the night again without jolting awake in a cold sweat. But me? I wasn't at peace. Not really. Not when I walked through campus and saw my reflection in the same windows I used to study beside. Only now I didn't recognize the man staring back. He was sharper, yes, colder, harder, forged by betrayal and revenge. But there was something hollow behind his eyes, like all the noise had stripped away whatever innocence was left. People called me a hero now. Ironic, considering I'd once been their villain. Professors invited me to guest lectures, students asked for selfies, and emails flooded in from aspiring lawyers who saw me as a symbol of resistance. But all I felt was tired. So tired. Like I'd been sprinting through a burning building only to find the exit led into another fire. Clara urged me to take a break. Disappear, George. Just for a while. You've earned peace. And maybe she was right. But how do you rest when you've built your whole identity around the fight? How do you sit still when standing tall is the only way you've survived? Still, I tried. I booked a quiet place upstate, turned off my phone, told Clara I needed space. She understood. She always did. It was there, in a tiny lakeside cabin far from the noise, that I opened the letter. Not an email, not a text. A real envelope. Sealed in wax, no return address. Inside, only a single sheet of paper in familiar handwriting. I never said sorry. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know. It wasn't all a lie. There were moments, George. Real ones. I remember every one of them. I hope you're free now. Willow. I stared at those words for what felt like hours, my fingers trembling slightly. It wasn't an apology. Not really. But it was the first time I'd seen her handwriting without venom stitched between the lines. And damn it, I hated her for it. Because even after everything, a part of me still ached when I read her name. But I didn't cry. I folded the letter, burned it in the fireplace, and watched the ashes scatter. I wasn't hers anymore. I wasn't anyone's. The next morning, I took a walk through the forest and thought about the road ahead. Not the revenge, not the war, just life. I thought about the boy I used to be before all of this. Hopeful, awkward, driven. He was gone, but maybe I could rebuild something from the ruins. When I returned to the city weeks later, Clara was waiting at my doorstep with 2 coffees and a smile that looked like home. She didn't ask questions, and I didn't give answers. We just sat on the steps, drinking in silence. We relaunched the podcast with a new season, not about corruption or betrayal, but about healing. Our first guest was a girl who rebuilt her life after being disowned by her family for standing up to injustice. Her story was quiet, powerful, and for the first time, I felt like we were building something that didn't require destruction. The university offered me a full scholarship again, along with a position as an ethics advisor for the Student Judiciary Committee. I hesitated, but Clara nudged me. You have the scars, now use them to protect others. And so I accepted. Not because I needed the validation, but because I needed to make sure no one else went through what I did. Ethan was serving a 5-year sentence, last I heard. Willow received probation, community service, and a permanent mark on her academic record. People debated if it was justice or leniency, but I stayed out of it. Their stories weren't mine to finish anymore. Mine was still being written. Months passed, the air shifted, and slowly the shadows faded. I began sketching again. Silly things at first, courtroom doodles, caricatures of professors. But Clara noticed, "That's the first time you've smiled while drawing," she said. And she was right. The darkness didn't own me anymore. It would always be part of me, but it wasn't my identity. I found peace not in forgetting the past, but in building a future where it couldn't hurt me anymore. And then one evening, under golden city lights, Clara looked at me and said, "You know, I think we made it." I laughed, a real unguarded laugh, and replied, "No, we survived it. Now let's figure out what it means to live." And just like that, the curtain closed. Not with a bang, not with applause, but with quiet redemption. Because sometimes the real victory isn't in proving everyone wrong. It's in standing tall when you have every reason to fall, and learning after all the smoke clears that you're still here, still breathing, and maybe, just maybe, still capable of love.